I'm Allison Ryder, 28, and at 9 months pregnant, I was sleeping on a dusty air mattress in my parents' garage. The concrete floor beneath me was cold, and the smell of motor oil mixed with my morning sickness made everything worse. My sister, Emma's boyfriend, needed a proper room for his gaming setup, so I, carrying their first grandchild, was relocated to make space for his convenience. The humiliation burned deeper than the physical discomfort. Here I was, a registered nurse who'd worked through the pandemic, reduced to this. My parents' golden child had spoken, and once again, I was invisible. They couldn't see past Emma's demands to notice their pregnant daughter's suffering, but what happened next would expose the cruel mathematics of their favoritism and change our family forever. Sometimes the people who push you to your breaking point unknowingly hand you the tools for your transformation. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay with me. This story is for anyone who's ever been overlooked, undervalued, or pushed aside. Because sometimes rock bottom becomes the foundation for something stronger. Asterisk, growing up in the Ryder household meant learning your place early. Mine was always in Emma's shadow, and the evidence lined her bedroom shelves like golden monuments to parental favoritism, soccer trophies, debate team awards, honor roll certificates, each one representing another moment when my own achievements went unnoticed. I remember the day I graduated nursing school, top of my class with a full scholarship I'd earned through 3 jobs and countless sleepless nights. Mom glanced at my diploma for maybe 30 seconds before launching into excitement about Emma's latest art project, a finger painting that somehow deserved a refrigerator shrine and 2 weeks of dinner. Conversation, that was the pattern. I studied, worked, sacrificed. Emma played, demanded, received when she wanted to attend the expensive state university for her creative writing journey. Guess who worked double shifts at the diner to help with expenses? When her poetry didn't pay the bills and she moved back home at 25, guess? Who gave up her room so Emma could have the bigger space for her artistic process? The responsible daughter, the invisible daughter, the one who could always be counted on to give a little more. David saw it immediately when we started dating 2 years ago. He'd watch family dinners with quiet incredulity as Mom hung on Emma's every word while barely acknowledging my promotion to head nurse. "They treat you like hired help in your own family," he said one night after Emma interrupted my story about saving a patient's life to complain about her barista job. But even David couldn't have predicted this level of disrespect. When Emma's boyfriend Jake moved in last month, he surveyed the house like a conquering general. The living room wasn't suitable for his gaming setup, too much foot traffic. The spare room was too small for his equipment. My room, however, with its large windows and quiet corner location, was perfect. "Allison won't mind switching," Emma announced at dinner, not even looking at me. "She's hardly here anyway with her work schedule." I was 8 months pregnant. I was here plenty, but as always, Emma's needs took precedence. Dad started moving my things to the garage the next day, installing a space heater and calling it cozy. Mom bought air freshener to mask the motor oil smell and acted like she'd solved a luxury hotel room problem. Jake set up his monitors and gaming chair in my childhood bedroom within hours. The room where I'd studied for my nursing boards, where I dreamed of the family I'd someday have converted into a shrine to a grown man's hobby while I, pregnant with their first grandchild, was relegated to sleeping beside the lawnmower. That night, lying on the thin air mattress, feeling my baby kick against the cold that seeped through the concrete floor, I realized something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about room arrangements or family dynamics anymore. This was about who mattered. And apparently, I didn't. The ultrasound photo was still warm from the printer when I walked into the kitchen that Tuesday morning in March. I'd been planning this moment for weeks, how I'd share the news, how their faces would light up, how everything would finally change between us. I have something wonderful to tell you, I said, setting the gray, black, and white image on the breakfast table between Mom's coffee and Dad's newspaper. Mom glanced down, squinted, then her eyes widened. Oh my goodness, Allison, you're pregnant. For exactly 30 seconds, I felt like I mattered. Mom stood up, hugged me, asked about due dates and doctor appointments. Dad folded his paper and smiled, actually smiled at me for the first time in months. October 15th, I said, my hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. David's over the moon. We've been trying for a year. Our first grandchild, Dad said softly, and I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard since I was little. Pride, maybe. Love. Then Emma walked in, still in pajamas at 11 a.m., took one look at the ultrasound photo, and everything shifted. Seriously? Now? Emma flopped into a chair dramatically. I was going to tell you guys about Jake's promotion today, but I guess that doesn't matter anymore. And just like that, my moment was over. Mom immediately turned to Emma, apologizing for the bad timing, asking about Jake's job like my pregnancy. Announcement was somehow inconsiderate. Dad folded the ultrasound photo and handed it back to me without another word. It's wonderful news, honey, Mom said, but she was already moving toward Emma. We'll talk more later. Emma, tell me about Jake's promotion. I stood there, holding the evidence of their first grandchild, invisible again. The pattern so familiar it shouldn't have surprised me, but pregnancy had made me hopeful. Stupid. Over the following weeks, as my morning sickness kicked in and my scrubs grew tighter, I kept waiting for that initial excitement to return. Instead, I watched them focus entirely on Jake's transition to day shift supervisor at the warehouse, Emma's new hobby of artisanal soap making, anything but the baby growing inside me. When David deployed unexpectedly in June for a 3-month assignment, I thought surely they'd step up. Their pregnant daughter, alone, needing support, this was their chance to show they cared. Instead, Mom suggested I might be more comfortable in the spare room since Emma and Jake were having relationship issues and needed privacy to work things out. When I pointed out that the spare room was barely big enough for a twin bed, let alone nursery furniture, Dad mentioned that the garage was actually quite spacious with the car parked outside. Just temporarily, Mom assured me, as if temporary made it acceptable. Until David gets back and you two find your own place. I wanted to remind them that I'd been saving for a house, that David and I had been looking at properties before his deployment. I wanted to point out that most expectant grandparents would be preparing a nursery, not moving their pregnant daughter further from the family circle, but I was tired. The second trimester exhaustion, the loneliness of David being gone, the constant feeling of being unwanted in my own home, it was easier to just agree, to be the accommodating daughter one more time. The night they moved my dresser and bed to the garage, I sat on the concrete floor and felt the baby's first real kicks. Strong, determined movements against my ribs, as if my child was already protesting the situation. I know, baby, I whispered, rubbing my growing belly. This isn't how it's supposed to be. But I had no idea then how much worse it would get, or how much stronger both of us would have to become. The space heater hummed constantly, a mechanical lullaby that never quite drowned out the sound of Jake's gaming sessions echoing through the house above me. At 3 a.m., when I was struggling to find a comfortable position with my growing belly, I could hear his victorious shouts and the rapid clicking of his keyboard through the thin ceiling. My childhood bedroom, now his personal arcade. The concrete floor was unforgiving, even with the yoga mat Mom had optimistically placed under my air mattress. By my 7th month, getting up to use the bathroom required a complicated rolling maneuver that left me breathless and dizzy. The walk from the garage to the house bathroom felt endless in the middle of the night, especially when autumn temperatures dropped and the space heater couldn't keep up with the drafts. Mrs. Patterson from next door was the first to comment. I was struggling with the garage door one morning when she appeared at the fence with her watering can. "Honey, are you living in there?" Her voice carried genuine concern mixed with disbelief. "At your stage." I forced a smile, my hand automatically, moving to support my lower back, just temporarily. "Family renovations." She studied me with the keen eye of someone who'd raised 4 children and survived 3 husbands. "That concrete floor can't be good for the baby or your sciatic nerve." She was right. The shooting pains down my left leg had started 2 weeks ago. Dr. Martinez had mentioned it at my last appointment, asking about stress levels and sleeping arrangements. I'd been vague, embarrassed to admit that at 28 years old, with a nursing degree and a husband serving his country, I was sleeping in my parents' garage like a displaced teenager. The physical discomfort was only part of it. The isolation was worse. Family dinners happened without me, not intentionally excluded, but not specifically invited either. I'd emerge from the garage to find them finishing dessert, the conversation flowing around topics I hadn't been part of. Emma's latest drama, Jake's opinions on everything from politics to pizza toppings, Mom's endless fascination with their relationship dynamics. "How are you feeling, honey?" Mom would ask as an afterthought, already clearing plates. "Getting enough?" Rest. Rest on an air mattress in a garage, listening to my replacement live in comfort above me. The dust was constant despite my daily sweeping. Fine particles that settled on everything, triggering coughing fits that made my already tight ribs ache. I'd developed a routine of covering my few belongings with sheets, creating a surreal landscape of ghost furniture in the dim garage lighting. Jake had no awareness of irony. He'd wander out to get something from the refrigerator in the garage, stepping carefully around my makeshift bedroom, commenting on how cozy I'd made it. Once, he asked if I minded keeping the noise down in the mornings, since he'd been staying up late gaming and needed to sleep in. I stared at him, this 26-year-old man asking a pregnant woman to be quieter in the garage where she'd been banished so he could have a room for his hobby. "I'll do my best," I said, because even then, even in my displaced anger, I was still trying to keep the peace. Emma never visited the garage. Not once in the 3 months I lived out there. She'd text me from inside the house when dinner was ready or when Mom needed something. But she never crossed the threshold to see how her pregnant sister was actually living. The neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Chun from across the street started leaving casseroles on the porch with notes specifically addressed to me. "For the expecting mother," they'd say, as if she understood something my own family had missed. The mail carrier. A kind woman named Rosa, who'd been delivering to our street for 15 years, began asking pointed questions about my due date and whether I needed anything. Her concern was more genuine than what I was getting inside the house. One evening in late September, as I was hanging up the few maternity clothes I owned on a makeshift line between the workbench and Dad's tool cabinet, I caught sight of myself in the old mirror he kept mounted on the wall. 9 months pregnant, living in a garage, hanging laundry next to rusty paint cans and bags of fertilizer. This was not how I'd imagined my pregnancy. Not how I'd pictured preparing for motherhood. David called that night, his voice crackling through, with spotty cell service at his base. "How are you holding up, love? Is the space heater keeping you warm enough?" I could have broken down. Could have told him about the concrete floor bruising my hips, about the isolation, about watching Jake sprawl across my childhood bed while I slept next to the lawnmower. But David was dealing with his own challenges, missing the pregnancy. He wanted to experience with me, worried sick about being away when the baby came. "I'm managing," I said instead. "Just ready for you to come home." 2 more weeks, he promised, and then we're getting our own place. This was supposed to be temporary. Temporary. Everyone kept using that word like it made the situation acceptable, as if living in substandard conditions was fine as long as it wasn't permanent. But my baby, was developing in this stress, in this cold, in this isolation. This wasn't temporary for the child who would be born carrying the cellular memory of their mother's displacement. That night, feeling another strong contraction that made me catch my breath, I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep pretending this was acceptable. I couldn't keep being grateful for scraps of consideration while my own family treated me like an inconvenient houseguest. I was about to become someone's mother. It was time to start acting like someone worth protecting. The contractions started at 2 in the morning on a Thursday in early October, sharp and regular enough to jolt me awake on the garage floor. I lay still for several minutes, timing them on my phone, hoping they would fade. False labor, maybe. Braxton Hicks contractions like I'd been having for weeks, but these felt different, urgent, real. By 4 a.m. They were coming every 7 minutes. I managed to get myself upright, grabbed my hospital bag, and made my way into the house. The kitchen was dark, the whole family asleep upstairs. I could hear Jake's gaming setup humming on standby through the ceiling above me. I knocked softly on my parents' bedroom door. "Mom? Dad, I think I'm in labor." Mom appeared in her robe, instantly alert. "How far apart are the contractions?" 6 minutes now. My water hasn't broken yet, but Dr. Martinez said to come in when they were 5 minutes apart or if I felt like something was wrong. Something wrong? Dad joined us in the hallway, pulling on a shirt. "What's wrong?" I pressed my hand to my lower back where the pain was radiating. "The baby feels different, lower, and I've been having some spotting." That got their attention. Mom was already reaching for her car keys when Emma's door opened. "What's all the noise about?" She stood there in silk pajamas, annoyed at being awakened. "Allison's in labor," Mom said, helping me toward the stairs. "Now? But we're supposed to go to dinner with Jake's parents tonight." They're finally meeting. Me officially. I stopped moving, another contraction gripping me hard enough to make me gasp. Through the pain, I heard my sister's priority clearly. Her dinner plans trumped my medical emergency. "Emma, your sister is having a baby," Dad said, but his tone was more explanatory than reproachful. "I know, but couldn't she have timed this better? Jake's parents are flying in from Phoenix. This is really important for our relationship." I stared at her through the contractions' aftermath. My baby was potentially in distress. I was in active labor, and Emma was upset about timing. "Go to your dinner," I managed, gripping the stair rail. "I'll try to have the baby more conveniently next time." Mom shot me a warning look. "Allison, don't be sarcastic." Emma didn't mean it that way. Except Emma absolutely meant it that way. She meant that her boyfriend's parents' visit was more significant than her nephew or niece entering the world. She meant that my labor was an inconvenience to her social schedule. At the hospital, Dr. Martinez confirmed what I'd suspected. "Your blood pressure is elevated and the baby's positioned awkwardly. We're going to monitor you closely, but this looks like stress-induced preterm labor." "Stress-induced?" Mom asked, settling into the visitor's chair. "Has she been under unusual stress recently? Changes in living situation, relationship problems, financial concerns?" I met Mom's eyes across the hospital bed. Here was her chance to acknowledge what they'd put me through, to admit that making a pregnant woman sleep in a garage might have consequences. "Nothing out of the ordinary," Mom said smoothly. "Just normal pregnancy concerns." Dr. Martinez looked skeptical but didn't press. "Well, we'll keep you for observation. The contractions are slowing down with the IV medication, but I want to make sure everything stabilizes." Mom stayed for 2 hours, checking her watch frequently. "I should get back to help Emma get ready for dinner," she finally said. "Will you be okay here alone?" I was 37 weeks pregnant, in a hospital bed, being monitored for preterm labor, and she was asking if I'd be okay alone so she could help Emma pick out an outfit. "I'll be fine," I said, because what else could I say? She kissed my forehead distractedly. Call if anything changes. And try to relax. Stress isn't good for the baby. After she left, I lay in the quiet hospital room, listening to my baby's heartbeat on the monitor. Strong, steady, reassuring. The nurses were kind, checking on me regularly, asking if I needed anything. The irony wasn't lost on the strangers. Were showing more concern for my well-being than my own family. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How's everything? Jake's parents loved the restaurant. They think he's ready for marriage. No questions about the baby. No concern about my condition. Just excitement about her relationship milestone while I lay in a hospital bed alone. That night, as the contractions finally subsided and my blood pressure returned to normal, I made a decision. I was going to be discharged in the morning, and I was not going back to that garage. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. My baby deserved better. And so did I dot the hospital bracelet around my wrist, bore my name, my date of birth, and my medical record number. But as I twisted it around my wrist in the dim room, it felt like something else entirely. Evidence? Proof that my family's treatment had real consequences. When David called from overseas that night, his voice tight with worry after Mom had texted him about the hospital visit, I finally told him the truth. They left me alone here, David. I was in preterm labor, and they left me alone because Emma had dinner plans. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd lost connection. I'm coming home, he said finally. Emergency leave. This ends now. For the first time in months, I wasn't facing this alone. While waiting for David's emergency leave to be approved, I found myself thinking about the nursing school graduation photo tucked away in my bedroom dresser, the one that had been moved to the garage along with everything else I owned. In it, I'm wearing my white coat for the first time, smiling despite the exhaustion that had become my constant companion. What the photo didn't show were the 3 jobs that made that moment possible. The early morning shifts at the hospital, cafeteria, the evening hours cleaning office buildings, the weekend shifts at the nursing home where I learned more about compassion than any textbook could teach. I'd worked 80-hour weeks for 4 years, sleeping in my car between shifts sometimes, living on vending machine coffee and determination. Emma was a sophomore in college then, majoring in creative writing and minoring in complaints about her. Course load. I'm so stressed, she'd call to tell me, usually while I was studying for anatomy finals after a 12-hour shift. Professor Williams expects us to read an entire novel every week. It's impossible. I'd listen to her vent about her overwhelming schedule of 3 classes and 2 days a week, then hang up to review cardiovascular physiology until dawn. When she needed money for textbooks or spring break trips, guess who picked up extra shifts? Allison doesn't mind helping, Mom would say when Dad occasionally questioned the constant financial requests. She's always been generous with family. Generous, as if I'd had a choice. The pattern had started early. When Emma was 12 and wanted piano lessons, I gave up my spot in the church youth group to babysit the neighbor's twins for lesson money. When she was 16 and desperate for a car, I worked double shifts at the diner all summer to help with the down payment. When she graduated high school and wanted to attend the expensive state university instead of the community college I attended, I deferred my own nursing school plans for a year to help with tuition. Emma's so creative, Mom would gush. She needs the right environment to flourish. You understand, don't you, Allison? You're more practical. You'll be fine anywhere. Practical, another word for expendable. I remembered the day Emma moved back home after college, her creative writing degree having failed to launch the literary career she'd envisioned. She'd tried freelance writing, tutoring, even a brief stint at a local newspaper that ended when she decided the editor didn't appreciate her artistic vision. I just need some time to figure things out, she announced. Moving back into her childhood bedroom like the previous 4 years had been an extended sleepover, that was 3 years ago. 3 years of Emma figuring things out while I worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital, came home to cook dinner, helped with household expenses, and listened to her complain about how hard it was to find her passion. When Jake appeared 8 months ago, I was actually relieved. Emma seemed happier, more focused. He had a steady job at the warehouse, seemed responsible enough. I thought maybe she'd finally found some direction. Instead, she'd found someone who enabled her sense of entitlement even more than our parents did. Jake thinks I should pursue my poetry more seriously, she announced one evening after he'd moved, and he believes in my talent. Jake's belief in Emma's talent, it turned out, meant I should contribute more to household expenses since Emma needed time to develop her artistic voice. Jake's support meant Emma couldn't be expected to do mundane things like cleaning or cooking, since it might interfere with her creative process. Jake's need for a proper gaming setup meant the pregnant daughter should sleep in the garage. Thought about all of this as I lay in the hospital bed, my hand resting on my belly where my baby moved restlessly. Had I been wrong to sacrifice so much? Had my willingness to give enabled their willingness to take? The nursing station buzzed, with quiet efficiency around me. These women, mostly women who had chosen a profession built on caring for others, who worked long hours for modest pay, who showed up every day to make other people's lives better. They understood something my family had missed, that caring for others shouldn't mean sacrificing yourself completely. "How are you feeling tonight, hon?" Nancy, the night nurse, checked my monitors with practiced efficiency. "Baby's looking good. Heart rate stable. Better," I said and meant it. "Much better." "Good. You scared us earlier with that blood pressure spike. Stress can be really hard on both of you." She adjusted my 4 and made notes on her tablet. "Do you have good support at home? Family helping out?" I looked at her, this stranger who had shown me more genuine concern in 12 hours than my family had in months, and felt something shift inside me. "I'm working on that," I said. She smiled. "Good. You deserve all the support in the world. First baby?" "Yes." "They're lucky to have you as their mom. I can tell you've got that fierce protective instinct already. Trust that. It'll serve you both well." After she left, I pulled out my phone and looked at the graduation photo I kept in my digital albums. The woman in that white coat had been through hell to get there. She'd sacrificed and worked and earned every achievement through her own determination. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that woman's strength. I'd let myself become the family doormat, the one who always gave more, expected less, made do, with whatever was left over, that woman in a white coat wouldn't accept sleeping in a garage while pregnant. She wouldn't enable a grown man's gaming hobby at the expense of her own comfort. She wouldn't let her family treat her like hired help while celebrating her sister's every whim. It was time to remember who I really was. And it was time for my family to remember it too. Emma's financial history read like a masterclass in enabled irresponsibility, and I knew every chapter by heart. The credit card statements I'd glimpsed over the years told the story: designer coffee addiction, impulsive online shopping sprees, subscription services she'd forgotten about, restaurant meals that cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. The latest crisis had been her car payment. "I can't afford it anymore," she'd announced in August, as if the monthly payment was a surprise rather than something she'd agreed to 18 months earlier. "Jake says I should just let them repossess it, but then how would I get to my therapy appointments?" Therapy appointments that she attended sporadically when they didn't conflict with lunch plans or Jake's schedule. "How much do you need?" Dad had asked, already reaching for his checkbook. "Just enough to catch up. Maybe 3 months worth." "And insurance. I forgot to pay insurance. 3 months." She'd been 3 months behind on a car payment and just now mentioning it. But Dad wrote the check without question, like he always did, while I watched from the kitchen doorway where I'd been making dinner for everyone. Maybe Emma should get a second job. I'd suggested quietly. I know the hospital is hiring in food service. Allison, Emma's going through a difficult time. Right now, Mom had replied. She's trying to find herself artistically. Not everyone can be as naturally focused as you are. Naturally focused. As if my work ethic was a genetic gift rather than something forged through necessity. Jake had opinions about Emma's financial situation, of course. She's an artist, he'd explain to anyone who'd listen. You can't expect someone with her sensitivity to work a regular job. It would crush her creative spirit. Jake's own creative spirit, apparently, was robust enough to handle 40 hours a week at the warehouse when he felt like showing up. His attendance record was spotty from what I'd overheard, but the supervisor position he'd recently landed came with just enough authority to make him insufferable. I'm basically running that whole department now, he'd boast during dinner while Emma gazed at him adoringly. They don't know how they manage without me. The truth, which I'd learned from my coworker whose brother also worked at the warehouse, was that Jake had been promoted mainly because no one else wanted the job. It came with minimal extra pay, but maximum responsibility for other people's mistakes. Most people saw it as a lateral move with extra headaches, but in Jake's version, he was management material being groomed for bigger things. In Emma's version, her boyfriend was a rising executive who understood her artistic soul. Jake thinks I should apply for grants, Emma announced one evening while I was doing dishes again. There are programs for emerging female poets. He researched it for me. That's wonderful, Mom said, settling into her favorite chair with her evening tea. What kind of grants? Arts councils, mostly. Some private foundations. Jake says I could probably get enough to focus on writing full-time for a year. I paused in my scrubbing. What would you write about? Emma looked at me as if the question was absurd. My experience. My truth. Jake says I have a unique perspective on modern relationships and family dynamics. Her unique perspective, as far as I could see, involved having every want catered to while contributing nothing meaningful to the household. But apparently that was grant-worthy material. You should definitely apply, Dad encouraged. We're proud of your dedication to your art. Dedication. She'd written maybe a dozen poems in the 3 years since college, most of them during brief bursts of inspiration that lasted a week or two before fading into complaints about writer's block. Jake nodded sagely. I keep telling her she's too modest about her talent. Emma's got something special. She just needs the right environment to let it flourish. The right environment, in Jake's view, required complete financial support, minimal responsibilities, and now, apparently, my bedroom for his gaming setup, because nothing said artistic flourishing, like displacing the pregnant family member to make more space for someone else's hobbies. The room situation is perfect now, Emma had mentioned the day after I'd moved to the garage. Jake can really focus on his streaming career with all that space. And I can write in the living room while he's gaming. The clicking sounds are actually kind of inspiring. His streaming career, another grand plan that involved Jake playing video games while a handful of viewers occasionally dropped commentary in the chat. He'd earned maybe $40 in the 6 months he'd been at it, but in his mind, he was building a brand. Content creation is the future, he'd explain when anyone questioned the hours he spent gaming. I'm building an audience. It takes time to develop that kind of following. Meanwhile, I was working 50-hour weeks at the hospital, coming home to cook dinner, clean the house, and sleep on an air mattress in the garage while Jake built his online empire in my former bedroom. The breaking point had come when Emma asked Em to co-sign a loan for a new laptop. I need something more powerful for editing videos, she'd explained. Jake says my current laptop isn't good enough for the content we want to create together. What kind of content? I'd asked. Poetry readings, maybe some couples content about balancing creativity and relationships. Jake thinks we could really build something together. I'd stared at her, my sister, who hadn't held a steady job in 3 years. asking me to guarantee a loan for equipment to support her boyfriend's hobby. Emma, I'm about to have a baby. David and I are trying to save for a house. I can't take on more debt right now. Her face had fallen like I'd personally crushed her dreams. But you always help family. Mom said you'd understand. Always. The word that had defined our relationship for 28 years. Not this time, I'd said, and watched her expression shift from disappointment to something approaching shock. It was the first time I'd ever said no to a family request, and judging by Emma's reaction, it was long overdue. David's military commendation letter had arrived the week before his emergency leave was approved. Recognition for his leadership during a supply crisis that had kept his unit operational under difficult conditions. I'd opened it in the garage, reading about my husband's exemplary service by the light of the space heater, and felt a fierce pride mixed with shame. Here was a man who commanded respect, who was trusted with critical decisions, whose character was being formally recognized by the United States Army, and his pregnant wife was sleeping on an air mattress in her parents' garage because her sister's boyfriend needed a better gaming setup. When his transport landed at the base on a gray Tuesday morning, I drove myself to meet him. No family farewell committee this time, just me, 9 months pregnant, picking up my husband whose leave had been granted because his wife's living situation constituted a family emergency. I saw him before he saw me, walking across the tarmac, with that precise military bearing that had attracted me to him 3 years ago. David Ryder moved through the world with purpose, treating people with respect, expecting the same in return. He was the kind of man who held doors, remembered birthdays, and called his mother every Sunday regardless of time zones. He was also the kind of man who wouldn't tolerate his family being disrespected. When he spotted me by the car, his face lit up with the smile that had sustained me through 3 months of deployment. But as he got closer, I watched his expression change as he took in my appearance, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I was favoring my left side where the sciatic pain had worsened, the exhaustion I couldn't hide anymore. "Jesus, ally," he said, dropping his duffel bag to embrace me carefully. "You look tired." "I'm okay," I started, but he pulled back to study my face. "No, you're not. How long has it been since you had a proper night's sleep?" "Define proper," I said, trying for humor. His jaw tightened. "Show me this garage setup." The drive home was quiet, David's hand resting on my knee as I updated him on the pregnancy, the scare 2 weeks ago, the blood pressure issues, Dr. Martinez's concerns about stress. He listened without comment, but I could feel his anger building, like pressure in a sealed container. "And Emma's boyfriend is in your room, why exactly?" he asked as we pulled into my parents' driveway. He needed space for his gaming equipment. Emma said it was temporary. Temporary. David's voice carried the clipped precision he used when controlling his temper. 3 months is temporary? They said. I know what they said. He parked the car and turned to face me fully. "Ally, I've been in active combat zones that provided better living conditions than what you've described." Before I could respond, Emma appeared on the front porch, waving enthusiastically. "David, you're home. We've missed you so much." David waved back politely, but his attention was on the garage door. "Show me," he said quietly. I led him through the side entrance, watching his face as he took in my living situation. The air mattress with its collection of extra blankets, the space heater humming in the corner, my dresser shoved against the workbench, the smell of motor oil that no amount of air freshener could completely mask. David stood in the middle of the concrete floor for a long moment, saying nothing. Then he walked to the thin wall that separated the garage from the house and placed his palm against it. "I can hear him," he said finally, through the wall, gaming. As if summoned, Jake's voice echoed through the drywall. "No, no, no. That's not how you play this game, you idiots." David's military training included conflict de-escalation, diplomatic communication, and strategic thinking. But I watched 28 years of Midwestern politeness leave his body as he listened to the man who displaced his pregnant wife yelling at strangers on the internet. "Get your things," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Whatever you need for tonight, we're getting a hotel room." "David, we don't need to." "Yes, we do." He was already moving, grabbing my overnight bag, unplugging the space heater. "My wife is not spending one more night in a garage, not one more." Mom appeared at the garage entrance as David was loading my belongings into the car. "David, what's going on?" "Why are you taking Allison's things?" "Because she shouldn't have things in a garage to begin with," David replied, his tone respectful but firm. "We'll be at the Hampton Inn until we find somewhere more appropriate." "More appropriate? I don't understand." "The garage is perfectly comfortable. We made sure she had heat and man." David straightened to his full height, and for a moment I saw him as his soldiers must, a man accustomed to command, not comfortable with being questioned. With respect, if any of my servicemen housed their pregnant wives in an unheated garage, I'd have them up for disciplinary action. Mom's face flushed. "It's not unheated." "We provided a space heater." "You provided a fire hazard in a room with concrete floors and no proper insulation." David's voice remained level, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. "Well, her sister's boyfriend occupies the bedroom she grew up in. Jake needed the space for his equipment, and my wife needed space for her pregnancy." "Which took priority in your household?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mom opened her mouth, closed it, looked toward the house where Dad had appeared in the doorway. "David, let's discuss this inside," Dad called. "Like family." "Family," David repeated, loading the last of my things into the car. "Yes, let's discuss what that means." He held the passenger door open for me, his hand gentle on my arm as I maneuvered my bulk into the seat. The contrast between his careful attention to my comfort and my family's months of indifference was stark enough to bring tears to my eyes. "Tomorrow," David said, addressing my parents from the driver's seat, "we're going to have a conversation about appropriate living arrangements for a pregnant woman. Tonight, my wife is going to sleep in a real bed with real heating and a bathroom she doesn't have to walk outside to reach." As we drove away, I watched my parents standing in the driveway looking stunned. It occurred to me that this might be the first time anyone had ever held them accountable for their treatment of me. "I'm sorry you had to come home to this," I said. Quietly, David reached over and took my hand. "I'm sorry I left you with this. That's not happening again." For the first time in months, I felt protected, valued, like someone was finally on my side. The hotel room felt like luxury clean sheets, reliable heat, a bathroom 3 steps away instead of 30. As I settled into the real bed with actual pillows, David sat beside me and placed his hand on my belly. "Tomorrow we start fixing this," he said. "All of it." I believed him. David Ryder didn't make promises he couldn't keep. The family meeting David had requested took place the next evening in my parents' living room, with Jake's gaming sounds providing an ironic soundtrack through the ceiling. I sat in the chair I'd occupied for family discussions my entire life, but everything felt different with David beside me, his presence shifting the entire dynamic. "We need to discuss Allison's living situation," David began, his tone professional but firm. "What happened the past 3 months is unacceptable." "Now hold on," Dad interjected, settling into his recliner with the defensive posture I recognized from my childhood. "We provided Allison with everything she needed. Heat, privacy, access to the house. You provided your pregnant daughter with an air mattress in an uninsulated garage," David corrected. "While a grown man occupies her childhood bedroom to play video games." Emma shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Jake's not just playing games, he's building a brand. It's a legitimate business venture." A business venture that's earned, what, $50 in 6 months? David's research had been thorough, while generating enough noise complaints that Mrs. Patterson asked me if we were running some kind of internet cafe. I hadn't known about the noise complaints, but I wasn't surprised. Jake's gaming sessions often stretched past midnight, complete with shouted commentary that echoed through the thin walls. Jake works full-time at the warehouse, too, Emma said defensively. The streaming is a hobby, David said flatly. One that required displacing a pregnant woman from her own family home. Mom leaned forward, her voice taking on the placating tone she used during family conflicts. David, I understand you're upset, but this was always meant to be temporary. Until you came home and you two found your own place. Temporary. David repeated the word like it tasted bitter. 3 months is temporary? Putting a pregnant woman at risk for stress-related complications is temporary? At risk? Dad's eyebrows rose. That's a bit dramatic, is it? David pulled out his phone and read from the screen. Preterm labor episode, October 1st. Elevated blood pressure requiring hospital monitoring. Cause listed as stress-induced complications. He looked up at my parents. Which part of that sounds dramatic to you? The room fell silent except for the distant sound of Jake's gaming session. Mom's face had gone pale, and I realized she might not have fully understood the seriousness of my hospital visit. She didn't tell us it was that serious, Mom said quietly. She shouldn't have had to, David replied. The fact that a pregnant woman was living in substandard conditions should have been serious enough. Emma stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. The garage is perfectly fine. Allison's just being dramatic because she's not the center of attention anymore. The silence that followed was profound. Even Jake's gaming sounds seemed to pause, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Excuse me? David's voice was soft, dangerous. Emma, Dad warned, but she was already committed to her position. Ever since I'd been happy with Jake, Allison's been jealous. She can't stand that I found someone who appreciates me. So she's making a big deal out of nothing to get sympathy. I felt David's hand find mine, a steadying anchor, as Emma revealed exactly what she thought of my situation. You think your sister's pregnancy complications are a bit for attention? David asked, his military composure straining. I think Allison has always resented that I don't just accept whatever scraps I'm given, Emma shot back. She's jealous that Jake and I have something real, something creative and meaningful. Something creative and meaningful, David repeated slowly. That required putting a pregnant woman in a garage. Oh, please. It's not like we threw her outside. She had everything she needed. She had a space heater and an air mattress on concrete. Emma crossed her arms defensively. She could have gotten a hotel if it was really that bad. The room exploded into shocked silence. Even Mom looked appalled. A hotel, David said, his voice deadly quiet. Your pregnant sister should have gotten a hotel rather than ask her family to treat her with basic human decency. I didn't mean, Emma started, but David held up a hand. No, I think you meant exactly that. I think you believe your sister should have quietly disappeared rather than inconvenience your gaming setup. It's not just gaming, Emma insisted. Jake's building something important. He has vision, ambition. He has a hobby that's earned less money than most people spend on coffee, David interrupted. While your sister works 50-hour weeks as a registered nurse, supporting herself and contributing to this household financially. Allison's always been good at practical things, Emma said dismissively. That's easy for her. What Jake and I are doing takes real creativity, real risk. Real risk. David stood up, his military bearing making him seem to fill the room. You want to talk about real risk? Real risk is your sister developing pregnancy complications because her own family values a grown man's gaming hobby over her health and safety. I watched this confrontation with a mixture of fascination and horror. For the first time in my life, someone was defending me against Emma's manipulation, calling out the family dynamics that had shaped my entire existence. David, Mom tried to intervene. I think we're all getting a bit heated. No, David said, firmly. We're getting honest. For the first time, apparently, he walked to the family photos lining the mantel, studying them with the same attention he'd give a military briefing. Interesting collection, he said finally. Emma's graduation, Emma's art show, Emma's birthday parties. Where are the photos? Of Allison's nursing school graduation? Her promotion to head nurse? Her commendation for work during the COVID crisis? I felt heat flood my cheeks. David, it's not what, L.A.? Not important. Not worth celebrating? He turned back to my parents. Your daughter saved lives during a global pandemic. She worked in the COVID ward when other nurses were quitting out of fear. She was recognized by the hospital administration for her dedication and skill. Where's that photo? The silence stretched uncomfortably, because of course there was no photo. There had been no celebration, no family dinner, no proud announcements to friends and neighbors. My commendation had been mentioned briefly during one dinner conversation, then immediately overshadowed by Emma's latest poetry reading. We're proud of Allison's work, Dad said defensively. Are you? David challenged, because your actions suggest otherwise. Your actions suggest that Emma's comfort matters more than Allison's health. That a stranger's gaming hobby matters more than your grandchild's well-being. As if summoned by the mention of gaming, Jake appeared at the top of the stairs. Hey, is everything okay down there? He called. You guys are being pretty loud, and I'm in the middle of a ranked match. The timing was so perfectly inappropriate that I almost laughed. Here we were, having a crucial family discussion about respect and priorities, and Jake was worried about his video game ranking. David looked up at him with the expression I imagined he used for insubordinate soldiers. We're having a family meeting. David called back. About living arrangements? Oh. Jake appeared uncertain for the first time since I'd known him. Should I? You should probably join us, David said, since your living situation is part of the discussion. As Jake made his way downstairs, I caught sight of something that made my heart stop. On the coffee table, partially hidden under a magazine, was a corner of an official-looking document. The letterhead was visible. County Property Records. My parents had been looking up property information, but why? Jake had barely settled onto the couch beside Emma when I reached for the document under the magazine. The motion was instinctive, driven by a sudden certainty that whatever my parents had been researching was connected to this confrontation. What's this? I asked, pulling out the official papers. Mom lunged forward. Allison, that's private. But I was already reading, and what I saw made my breath catch. Property deed. 847 Maple Street, our address. Current owners listed as Robert, James Ryder, and Margaret Ann Ryder. And Allison Claire Ryder. My name on the house deed. Equal ownership. I don't understand, I said, looking up at my parents' stricken faces. My name is on the deed. How is my name on the deed? David leaned over to read the document, his expression growing more serious with each line. This is dated 15 years ago. Transfer from ... double quotes. He flipped to the next page. From Eleanor Ryder, your grandmother. Grandma Eleanor left me part of the house. The room seemed to tilt around me. When? Why didn't anyone tell me? Mom sank back into her chair, her face pale. It's complicated, Allison. Complicated how? David's voice carried the edge of a man who dealt with enough evasion. For one day, Dad cleared his throat, to sound rough with discomfort. Your grandmother, she worried about Emma's spending habits. Even as a teenager, Emma was impulsive with money. Eleanor thought it would be better if what? I demanded. If the more responsible granddaughter had some security. Mom. Finish quietly. She left Emma her savings account and you have the house. The words hit me like a physical blow. Half the house. I own half this house. Technically, yes, but what? David interrupted, his lawyer-precise mind already working through the implications. But you've been treating your daughter like a tenant, making her pay rent on property she owns? The silence that followed was deafening. Even Jake looked uncomfortable, finally understanding that the power dynamics he'd assumed might not be what they seemed. You've been taking my money, I said slowly, the pieces clicking into place, for 15 years. Rent, utilities, groceries, household expenses. I've been paying to live in my own house. It's not that simple, Dad protested. We pay the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance. From the rent I pay you, I said, my voice rising. From the money I contribute every month. Money I pay to live in a house I already own half of. Emma found her voice first. That's ridiculous. This has always been Mom and Dad's house. Grandma Eleanor barely knew what she was doing those last few years. Grandma Eleanor was sharp as a tack until the day she died. I snapped. And apparently she knew exactly what she was doing. David was studying the deed with the intensity he brought to military documents. This is a legal transfer of ownership. Equal shares, clear title. Allison, you don't just own half this house. You have equal say in all decisions regarding the property. Equal say, I repeated, looking around the living room where I'd grown, up where I'd been treated like a guest for the past decade, where I'd been told I needed to accommodate everyone else's needs, including who lives here, David added pointedly. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Look, I don't want to cause family problems. You already have, David said bluntly. You've been living in a room that belongs to someone else, displacing the legal owner of this property. I didn't know, Jake protested. Emma said it was her parents' house. Because that's what we told everyone, Mom said defensively. Allison was barely 18 when Eleanor died. She was starting college, focusing on her studies. We handled everything. You handled everything by lying to me? I stood up, the pregnancy making the movement awkward, but my anger giving me strength. By letting me believe I was dependent on your generosity when I legally owned half of everything. We were protecting you, Dad said. From the responsibility, from the financial burden, from my inheritance, I corrected. You were protecting yourselves from having to treat me as an equal owner instead of a convenient source of rent money. The document in my hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 15 years of believing I was the charity case, the daughter, who needed to earn her place through constant giving, constant accommodation. 15 years of my family taking my money while treating me like I should be grateful for whatever scraps of consideration they offered. How much? I asked quietly. How much what? Mom asked. How much have I paid you over the years? Rent, utilities, groceries, household expenses. How much of my own money have you taken to let me live in my own house? David was already calculating on his phone, based on what you've told me. Roughly $800 a month for the past 10 years, plus college contributions before that. Almost $100,000, I said when he showed me the screen. I've paid you nearly $100,000 to live in a house I already own half of. Emma stood up abruptly. This is insane. You can't just decide you own everything because of some old paperwork. Old paperwork? David held up the deed. This is a legal document. Filed with the county, notarized, completely valid. But what about me? Emma's voice took on the whining tone I'd heard my entire life. What about my room? Where am I supposed to live? In your own place, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Like other adults your age. I can't afford my own place. Jake and I are just getting started. Then Jake can support you, David said, since you're adults in a relationship. His supervisor's salary isn't enough for rent, and then get a job. Emma, I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. Get a job like every other adult in the world. The suggestion seemed to physically pain her. You know, I'm not good at regular jobs. I'm creative. I need time to develop my talents. Your talents can develop in an apartment you pay for yourself. David said, "This house belongs to Allison as much as it belongs to your parents. And she has just as much right to decide who lives here." I looked around the room at my family, the people who had shaped my entire understanding of my worth, my place in the world, my obligation to give without receiving. The people who had been lying to me for 15 years about something as fundamental as where I belonged. "I wanted to see all the documents," I said. "Everything related to Grandma Eleanor's will, the property transfer, the tax records, everything." "Allison," Mom pleaded, "don't let this change our family." "You changed our family," I said. 15 years ago, when you decided to lie to me about my inheritance. When you decided to take my money while making me feel grateful for the privilege. "We never meant—" "You meant exactly what happened," David interrupted. "You meant for Allison to believe she was dependent on your charity while she was actually subsidizing your lifestyle." The truth of it hung in the air like smoke. I owned half of everything around me, the house, the property, the assets. I'd been paying rent to live in my own home while sleeping in the garage to accommodate my sister's boyfriend, Dot. It would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. "Things are going to change," I said quietly, "starting now." The eviction notice template I printed from a legal website lay on the kitchen table the next morning, crisp and official looking. David had helped me research tenant rights and property law until well past midnight at the hotel, and the conclusion was clear. As a co-owner of the property, I had every legal right to terminate Jake's residence. 30 days, David explained to my parents over coffee. That's the standard notice period for month-to-month tenants, which is what Jake technically is since there's no written lease agreement. Dad set down his mug with shaking hands. "This is our family home, Allison. You can't just throw people out." "It's my family home, too," I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded. "And Jake isn't family?" "He's Emma's boyfriend who's been living rent-free in my bedroom for 3 months. "But where will they go?" Mom asked as if Emma and Jake's housing situation was my responsibility. "That's for them to figure out," David said. "Like other adults do." Emma appeared in the doorway, her hair disheveled from sleep, her face already set in the petulant expression I knew so well. "You can't be serious about this." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," I said, sliding the notice across the table toward her. "Jake has 30 days to find somewhere else to live." She stared at the document without touching it. "This is revenge." "You're punishing me because I'm happy." "I'm reclaiming my space because I'm pregnant and sleeping in a garage," I corrected. "Your happiness isn't my responsibility." "But Jake's lease at his old place expired 3 months ago," David finished. "We checked. He's been month to month there too, which is why it was so easy for him to move in here." Emma's composure cracked. "You investigated Jake?" "I researched the legal situation," David replied. "Due diligence. Something your family should have done before making housing decisions." The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Jake's arrival. He walked into the kitchen with the casual confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in our home, grabbing a cup of coffee and settling at the table like he owned it. "Morning, everyone," he said cheerfully. "What's all the serious talk about?" I slid the eviction notice toward him. "You need to find somewhere else to live." Jake laughed, actually laughed, as if I'd made a joke. "Good one, Allison." "But seriously, what's going on?" "Seriously, you have 30 days to move out," David said. "This is a legal notice of termination of tenancy." The laughter died on Jake's face as he read the document. "This is crazy. Emma, tell them this is crazy." Emma had gone pale, her earlier defiance replaced by something approaching panic. "You can't do this." "We don't have anywhere else to go." You have 30 days to find somewhere, I said. That's more notice than most people get. But the deposit, first month's rent, we don't have that kind of money saved up, Jake protested. Then you should have been saving instead of spending your supervisor's salary on gaming equipment, David observed. Jake's face flushed. My equipment is an investment. I'm building a brand. Build it somewhere else. I said. The kitchen fell, silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of morning traffic. I watched Jake's expression cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally something approaching understanding. This is about the room, isn't it? He said, look, if it's that big a deal, I can move my setup to the basement. Emma and I can share the smaller room. This isn't about room arrangements, David said. This is about the fact that you're living rent-free in someone else's house while the actual owner sleeps in a garage. I didn't know about the ownership thing, Jake said defensively. Emma said it was her parents' house. Because that's what we believe too, Mom interjected quickly. This whole ownership situation is new to all of us. It's 15 years old, I corrected. It's only new to me because you kept it secret. Emma finally reached for the eviction notice, her hands trembling as she read it. 30 days. You're giving us 30 days to upend our entire lives. I'm giving you 30 days to become self-sufficient adults, I replied. Something that should have happened years ago. You don't understand, Emma said, her voice taking on the desperate edge. I remember it from childhood when she wanted something badly. Jake and I are planning to get engaged. We're building a life together. You can't just destroy that because you're jealous. Jealous of what? I asked. A relationship so fragile it can't survive basic adult responsibilities like paying rent? Jake stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. Emma, let's go talk somewhere private. No, David said firmly. You're going to listen to this because it affects everyone in this house. Allison owns 50% of this property. She has equal say in who lives here, and she's saying you don't. This is discrimination, Jake said wildly. You can't evict someone because you don't like them. I can terminate a month-to-month tenancy with proper notice for any reason that isn't protected by law, I said, quoting from the research David and I had done, and not liking someone isn't a protected class. But we don't have anywhere to go, Emma repeated, as if saying it enough times would change the reality. Jake has a full-time job with supervisor pay, David pointed out. Plenty of people support themselves and their partners on warehouse wages. You'll figure it out. It's not that simple, Emma protested. First month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, that's thousands of dollars we don't have. Because you've been living rent-free for 3 months instead of saving money, I said, that's not my problem to solve. The conversation continued for another hour, with Emma and Jake cycling through various arguments, financial hardship, family loyalty, the unfairness of sudden changes. But the eviction notice remained on the table between us, official and immutable. Finally, Jake picked up the document. Fine, we'll find somewhere else. But don't expect me to pretend this is anything other than petty revenge. Call it whatever you want, I said. You still have to be out by November 15th. After they left the kitchen, presumably to start the apartment hunting they should have been doing months ago, I sat at the table with my parents. The house felt different already. The power dynamics shifted so fundamentally that even the air seemed to move differently. I know you're angry, Mom said carefully, and you have every right to be. But Emma is still your sister. Emma is an adult who's been enabled for too long, I replied. This is actually the kindest thing I can do for her, force her to grow up. And if she can't manage it, Dad asked. If she fails, then she fails, I said. Like adults do sometimes. And then she learns from it and tries again. David reached over and squeezed my hand. Allison's not responsible for managing Emma's life. She never was. But I could see in my parents' faces that they didn't really believe that. Even now, even after everything, they expected me to be the one who gave in, who found a compromise, who sacrificed my own needs to make things easier for Emma. For 28 years, I'd met that expectation. But not anymore. I was about to become someone's mother. It was time to stop being everyone else's safety net. The fake medical bills appeared on the kitchen counter 3 days after I'd served the eviction notice, scattered dramatically around Emma's laptop like evidence of some terrible crisis. The letterhead looked official at first glance, Metropolitan, Women's Health Associates, but something about the formatting struck me as wrong. Emma's been having some health issues, Mom announced when I came in from my doctor's appointment. Female problems. Very serious ones. I picked up one of the bills, scanning the charges. Ovarian ultrasound, hormone therapy consultation, surgical. Consultation ... I looked up at Mom. When did all this happen? This week. She's been in terrible pain, but didn't want to worry anyone with everything else going on. Emma appeared in the doorway at that moment, moving with the careful gait of someone experiencing significant discomfort. Or someone performing significant discomfort. "Oh, Allison," she said weakly. "You saw the bills?" "I didn't want you to know. Not with your own pregnancy to worry about." I studied my sister's face, the pale complexion that could be achieved with the right foundation, the slightly hunched posture that suggested abdominal pain. Emma had always been dramatic, but this performance was elaborate even for her. "What exactly is wrong?" I asked. "Possible ovarian cysts. Maybe endometriosis. The doctors want to do exploratory surgery, but the insurance situation is complicated because I'm between jobs." Between jobs. Emma hadn't had a job to be between in 6 months. "Which doctor?" I asked. "I know most of the gynecologists in the area through the hospital." Emma's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell, at Metropolitan Women's Health." I pulled out my phone and did a quick search. "There's no Metropolitan Women's Health Associates in our area, Emma, and no Dr. Sarah Mitchell listed with any of the women's health practices." "It's a new practice," Emma said quickly. "Very specialized. That's why the bills are so high." I looked more closely at the medical bills, my nursing training helping me spot the inconsistencies. The procedure codes were wrong. The formatting didn't match any medical billing system I'd seen. And the totals were suspiciously round numbers exactly. $3,000, $5,000, $7,000. "Emma," I said quietly, "these bills are fake." The accusation hung in the air. Mom gasped, Dad appeared from the living room, and Emma's performance of pain flickered for just a moment. "How can you say that?" Emma asked, her voice rising with indignation. "I'm in crisis, and you're accusing me of lying?" "I'm accusing you of creating fake medical bills," I said, holding up the papers. "The procedure codes don't exist. The clinic doesn't exist, and the billing format is wrong." "You're not a doctor," Emma protested. "You don't know everything about medical billing?" "I'm a nurse who processes insurance claims daily," I replied. "And I know what real medical bills look like." David appeared in the kitchen, drawn by the raised voices. He took one look at the bills and then at Emma's defensive posture. "Let me guess," he said. "Convenient medical emergency that requires expensive treatment just days after receiving an eviction notice." "David, Emma is genuinely sick," Mom protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then she should be happy to provide the contact information for her doctor so we can verify the treatment plan," David said. "For such serious conditions, she need ongoing care anyway." Emma's composure cracked completely. "You can't call my doctor." Patient confidentiality. Patient confidentiality doesn't prevent you from giving me the office number, I said. "I just want to understand your treatment options." "I don't have to prove anything to you," Emma snapped, abandoning her performance of illness entirely. "You've already made up your mind to throw me out on the street." "I've made up my mind to reclaim my bedroom," I corrected. "What you do after that is your choice." Emma turned to our parents with tears in her eyes, real tears this time, born of desperation rather than performance. "How can you let her do this to me? I'm your daughter too." "You're both our daughters," Dad said uncomfortably. "But Emma, if these bills aren't real, they're real." Emma insisted, but the protest sounded hollow even to her. Jake chose that moment to join us, carrying a stack of apartment listings he'd printed from the internet. "I found some places we can afford," he announced, then stopped short at the tension in the room. "What's going on?" "Emma's latest crisis," David said dryly. "Mysterious medical bills from a clinic that doesn't exist." Jake looked at the bills, then at Emma, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable. "Emma, we talked about this." I said I'd figure out the money situation, not what. I asked, interested in this glimpse of conversation I hadn't been privy to. Jake looked trapped between loyalty and honesty. "Not making things more complicated with creative solutions?" "Creative solutions," David repeated. "Is that what we're calling fraud now?" "It's not fraud," Emma exploded. "It's desperation. You have no idea what it's like to have your entire life upended because someone decides to be vindictive." "Vindictive," I said, tasting the word. "Is that what you call a pregnant woman wanting to sleep in a bedroom instead of a garage?" "You're doing this to punish me for being happy," Emma continued, her voice taking on the hysterical edge I remembered from childhood tantrums. "You can't stand that I found love while you were stuck in a failing marriage, Emma." David's voice cut through her accusation like a blade. "Stop talking now." But Emma was past the point of strategic thinking. Everyone always says how responsible Allison is, how mature, how selfless. But this proves what she really is: jealous, petty, vindictive. "What I really am," I said, standing up slowly, "is done. Done enabling your delusions, done financing your lifestyle, done pretending that your inability to function as an adult is somehow my responsibility." I walked to the counter and swept up the fake medical bills. "These are going in the trash where they belong. Jake, I suggest you focus on those apartment listings because the eviction notice stands." "And Emma?" I turned to face my sister fully. "The next time you want to lie about a medical crisis, maybe research actual medical terminology first." Emma's face crumpled as her last desperate gambit failed completely. "You're destroying our family." "I'm setting boundaries," I corrected. "Something this family should have learned to do decades ago." As I left the kitchen, I heard Emma dissolve into tears in Jake's uncomfortable attempts to comfort her. But for the first time in my adult life, someone else's emotional crisis wasn't my problem to solve. The fake medical bills went into the trash, along with my last trace of guilt about the eviction notice. Emma had shown me exactly who she was willing to become to avoid adult responsibility. It was time for both of us to grow up, but only one of us was going to do it willingly. My water broke at 6:47 a.m. on November 3rd, 17 days before Emma and Jake's move-out date. I was standing in my reclaimed bedroom, finally mine again, after David helped me move back from the garage. When the warm fluid ran down my legs and pooled on the hardwood floor, "David," I called, my voice surprisingly calm despite my racing heart. "It's time." Within minutes, our carefully planned birth routine kicked into gear. David grabbed our hospital bag while I changed clothes and called Dr. Martinez's office. The contractions were still mild, spaced about 8 minutes apart, but something felt different from the false labor episode weeks earlier. More purposeful, more real. "We should call your parents," David said as he helped me to the car. "After we get to the hospital," I replied. "I want to be sure this is really it before we create a family emergency." The 15-minute drive to the hospital passed in a blur of increasingly intense contractions and David's steady, calming presence. His military training had taught him to stay focused under pressure, and I drew strength from his composure as my body began the serious work of bringing our child into the world Dr. Martinez met us in the labor and delivery unit, her familiar face a welcome sight as the nurses settled me into the birthing room. "How are we feeling, Allison?" "Ready," I said, surprised by how true that felt. After months of uncertainty and family drama, this becoming a mother was the one thing I felt completely prepared for. "Let's check your progress," Dr. Martinez said, and after a brief examination, she smiled. 4 centimeters dilated, 100% effaced. "This baby is definitely coming today." David squeezed my hand as another contraction peaked, his presence anchoring me through the intensity. "You're incredible," he murmured. "Absolutely incredible." By noon, I was deep in active labor, the contractions coming fast and strong. "David," called my parents between contractions, his voice professionally calm as he updated them on our progress. "She's doing great," I heard him say, 7 centimeters now. "Probably another few hours." What I didn't hear was my family's response, but I could guess. Emma would want to know if this would interfere with her apartment viewings. My parents would express concern while secretly calculating whether they could make it to the hospital and still attend their afternoon plans. When they arrived an hour later, I was in transition, the most intense phase of labor where the contractions come relentlessly and the urge to push becomes overwhelming. Emma walked into the room wearing a tight dress and full makeup, as if she were attending a social event rather than her nephew's birth. "How much longer?" she asked, settling into the visitor's chair with a dramatic sigh. "Jake and I have an appointment to see an apartment at 4. I was between contractions, breathing heavily and focused inward, but David's response was crystal clear. "Your sister is in labor, Emma. Your nephew is being born. Figure out your own schedule. I'm just asking," Emma protested. "I want to be here for the birth, but we might lose this apartment if we don't show up." "Then go," I managed to say between contractions. "Go to your apartment viewing, Allison," Mom chided. "Emma wants to be here for you." "No," I gasped as another contraction built. "She wants to know when it will be convenient for her to be here." Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, took one look at the family dynamics playing out in the labor room, and made an executive decision. "I need some space in here," she announced. "Only essential support people during the final stages. Everyone else can wait in the family room." Emma opened her mouth to protest, but David was already escorting my parents toward the door. "We'll let you know as soon as the baby arrives," he said diplomatically, alone with David and the medical team. I felt my entire world narrow to the essential work of bringing our child safely into the world. The contractions were intense, but purposeful now, each one bringing us closer to meeting our baby. "I can see the head," Dr. Martinez announced during the next push. "Beautiful dark hair, just like Mom's." 3 more contractions, 3 more pushes, and then the most incredible sensation of relief and completion as our baby slipped into the world. The cry that filled the room was strong and healthy and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Dr. Martinez said, placing our daughter on my chest. "A beautiful, healthy girl." I looked down at my daughter, wet and wrinkled and absolutely perfect, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This tiny person had been depending on me for 9 months, trusting me to keep her safe, to make good choices, to create a stable environment for her growth. I'd spent months in a garage, stressed and uncomfortable, while my family prioritized everyone else's needs over my pregnancy. But looking at my daughter now, I realized I'd found my strength just in time to protect her from the dysfunction that had shaped my own childhood. "What's her name?" the nurse asked, preparing the identification bracelet. David and I had discussed names for months, but looking at our daughter's serious little face, I knew exactly who she was. "Eleanor," I said. "Eleanor Ruth Ryder, after her great-grandmother." David's eyes filled with tears as he understood the significance. Eleanor, the grandmother who had seen me clearly enough to leave me half the family home, who had recognized my worth when my parents couldn't, who had given me the foundation I needed to stand up for myself and my daughter. "Hello, Eleanor," David whispered, stroking our daughter's tiny fist. "Welcome to the world, sweetheart." The hospital bracelet they placed around Eleanor's impossibly small wrist was pale pink with black printing. Her name, her birth date and time, her parents' names. Such a simple piece of plastic, but it represented everything I'd been fighting for: the right to make decisions for my family, to prioritize my child's needs, to create the stable, loving environment every baby deserves. When my parents and Emma were finally allowed back into the room, they found me sitting up in bed, Eleanor nestled against my chest, both of us glowing with the quiet confidence of having accomplished something extraordinary together. "She's beautiful," Mom said softly, her expression genuinely moved as she looked at our first grandchild. "What's her name?" Dad asked. "Eleanor Ruth Ryder," I said, watching their faces as they processed the significance. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "After your grandmother. After the woman who made sure I had a foundation to build on," I confirmed, even when I didn't know it. Emma leaned over to look at her niece, and for a moment, her expression softened with genuine wonder. "She's so tiny and perfect." "She is perfect," I agreed. "And she's going to grow up knowing she's valued, knowing she matters, knowing she deserves to be treated with respect." The message was clear, even wrapped in the soft language of new motherhood. Eleanor would not grow up in the same dysfunction that had shaped my childhood. She would not learn to minimize her own needs to accommodate everyone else's comfort. She would learn to expect better, and I would make sure she got it. The nursery paint samples were spread across my bedroom floor like colorful promises of the future soft yellows, gentle greens, warm creams that would create the peaceful environment Eleanor deserved. David and I had spent the morning after bringing her home from the hospital planning the room that should have been prepared months ago. "What about this one?" David held up a sample called Morning Sunshine. "It's cheerful but not overwhelming." I shifted Eleanor in my arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit against my shoulder, how her tiny fingers curled around mine with such trust. "I love it." Warm but soothing. From downstairs came the sound of boxes being packed and furniture being moved. Emma and Jake had 10 days left on their eviction notice, and the activity had intensified since Eleanor's birth 3 days ago. Whether it was the reality of a newborn in the house or the final acceptance that I wouldn't change my mind, they were finally taking the move seriously. "I can't believe you're really doing this," Emma had said that morning, standing in the doorway of my room while I nursed Eleanor. "Making us homeless with a newborn in the house." "I'm not making you homeless," I'd reply calmly. "I'm making you independent. Jake has a job, you're both adults. Figure it out. But what if something happens? What if we can't manage the rent? Then you'll learn to manage it, or you'll face the consequences like other adults do." It was a conversation we'd had variations of every day since I'd served the eviction notice, but something had changed in my response. Having Eleanor in my arms made every boundary feel not just justified, but essential. This tiny person was depending on me to create a stable, healthy environment. That took priority over everyone else's comfort. "The contractor can start next week," David said, scrolling through his phone. "Once Emma and Jake finish moving out, we can have the room painted and the flooring installed. Eleanor can move in here with us until it's ready." I looked around. My reclaimed bedroom, the room where I'd studied for nursing school, where I'd dreamed of my future family, where my daughter would spend her first weeks of life. It felt like reclaiming more than just physical space. It felt like reclaiming myself. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called that Mom appeared with a cup of tea and the tentative expression she'd worn since Eleanor's birth. "I brought you some chamomile. How are you feeling?" Tired but good, I said honestly. Eleanor's sleeping better than I expected. Mom settled into the rocking chair we'd moved back from the garage, her movements careful around her granddaughter. She's so beautiful, Allison. Such a good baby. She is. I adjusted Eleanor's blanket, protective instincts flaring as Mom reached toward her. I was wondering, Mom continued, if you might reconsider the move-out date. With the baby so new and Emma having such a hard time finding a place they can afford. I felt David tense beside me, his protective instincts as sharp as mine had become. Mom, we've been through this. The eviction notice stands. But surely, now that Eleanor's here, you can see how important family is, how we all need to support each other. The irony was breathtaking. After months of my family failing to support me when I needed it most, Mom was invoking family unity to protect Emma from consequences. Eleanor is exactly why the eviction notice stands, I said quietly. I need to know that my daughter's environment is stable, that her needs come first, that she won't grow up watching adults avoid responsibility. Emma's not avoiding responsibility. She's trying. She created fake medical bills 3 days ago, David interrupted. That's not trying. That's fraud. Mom's face flushed. She was desperate. You have to understand. I understand that desperation doesn't excuse lies, I said. And I understand that enabling someone doesn't help them grow. Eleanor stirred in my arms, making the soft sounds that meant she was waking up. I watched her eyes flutter open, unfocused, but alert, taking in the world she'd been born into. The thought of her growing up in the same dysfunction that had shaped my childhood was unbearable. I want Eleanor to see adults who keep their word, I continued, who face consequences for their choices, who solve problems instead of creating drama to avoid them. Emma's your sister, Mom said, as if that fact trumped everything else. And Eleanor's my daughter, I replied. She's my priority now. Mom was quiet for a long moment, watching Eleanor's tiny movements. When you were born, she said finally, I thought the hardest part would be keeping you safe from outside dangers. I never imagined I'd have to protect you from family choices. The admission hung between us, more honest than most of our conversations had been in years. You didn't protect me, I said gently. You enabled Emma and let me absorb the consequences. For my entire life, I've been the one who gives more, expects less, makes do with whatever's left over. That pattern ends with Eleanor. But family should treat each other with respect, David interjected. Family should celebrate each other's achievements, support each other through difficulties, and contribute fairly to shared responsibilities. When did your family last do any of that for Allison? Mom couldn't answer because the truth was too obvious. My nursing school graduation overlooked for Emma's latest art project. My promotion to head nurse, forgotten in favor of Emma's relationship drama. My pregnancy treated as an inconvenience to Emma's living situation. The boundaries I'm setting aren't punishment, I explained. They're protection. For Eleanor, for my marriage, for my own sanity, and for Emma too, David added. Whether she realizes it or not, from downstairs came the sound of Jake's voice raised in frustration, followed by Emma's crying. Another crisis in their perpetual state of crisis. Another emergency that someone else would be expected to solve. I should go help them, Mom said. Automatically. You should let them figure it out themselves, I corrected. They're adults, Mom. Treating them like children doesn't help anyone. After Mom left, David and I continued planning Eleanor's nursery. We chose the morning sunshine paint, decided on hardwood floors that would be easy to clean, discussed the placement of furniture that would grow with our daughter. She'll never sleep in a garage, David said quietly, understanding the significance of our planning. She'll never doubt that she matters, I agreed. She'll never have to earn her place in her own family. Eleanor made a soft sound, her tiny hand reaching toward the paint samples scattered around us. Even at 3 days old, she seemed to understand that these preparations were for her, that we were creating a space where she would be valued and protected. The transformation of the house was physical but also emotional. Emma and Jake's boxes in the hallway represented more than just a move. They represented the end of enabling, the beginning of accountability, the establishment of boundaries that had been missing for decades. 10 more days, David said, calculating the timeline. Then we can really start building the life we want. I looked down at Eleanor, her serious dark eyes studying my face with the intensity only newborns possess. She didn't know about eviction notices or family drama or years of dysfunction. She only knew that she was safe, fed, loved, and that's all she would ever need to know. The rest, the boundaries, the consequences, the difficult conversations were adult responsibilities that I would handle so she could simply be a child. For the first time in my life, I was putting my immediate family first. Not my parents, not my sister, not the complicated dynamics that had shaped my entire childhood, not my husband, my daughter. My own peace of mind. It felt revolutionary and absolutely right. The thank you cards from my patients had been accumulating in my work locker for months, handwritten notes from families whose loved ones I'd cared for during their most vulnerable moments. I brought them home to show David, wanting him to understand the professional respect I commanded outside our family dysfunction. Listen to this one, I said, settling into the nursery rocking chair with Eleanor. Dear Allison, your compassion during my mother's final days meant everything to our family. You treated her with dignity when she couldn't advocate for herself, and you helped us understand what she needed. Thank you for being exactly the nurse she deserved. David looked up from assembling the crib, his expression thoughtful. How many of these do you have? Maybe 50 from the past year alone. I shifted Eleanor to my other arm, marveling at how natural motherhood felt after the chaos of pregnancy. Patients request me specifically now. The charge nurse says I have a gift for connecting with families in crisis. Because you understand what it feels like to be overlooked, David observed. To have your needs minimized by the people who should be protecting you. It was true. My patients saw something in me that my own family had missed. The ability to advocate for those who couldn't advocate for themselves, to ensure dignity and respect in difficult circumstances, to recognize when someone needed more support than they were receiving. The irony is that I'm better at setting boundaries at work than I ever was at home, I admitted. When a doctor dismisses a patient's pain, I speak up. When a family member is being unreasonable about visiting hours, I enforce the rules. But with Emma... You've been trained since childhood to accommodate Emma, David said. That's not a character flaw. That's conditioning. From downstairs came the sound of voices, more people than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chun in our driveway, talking animatedly with my parents. Looks like the neighbors are having opinions about something, David said, following my gaze. We didn't have to wait long to find out what. Dad appeared in the nursery doorway, his expression uncomfortable. The neighbors are asking questions, he said without preamble, about Emma and Jake moving out, about the eviction. What kind of questions? I asked, though I could guess. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that it seemed strange for parents to evict their pregnant daughter's sister during the newborn period. She's concerned about family stability. The neighborhood gossip network was evidently in full swing. I wasn't surprised. Mrs. Patterson had been watching our family drama unfold for months. From my garage exile to David's emergency return to Emma's increasingly dramatic exits from the house. What did you tell her? David asked. That it's complicated. Family business, Dad replied. But she's not the only one asking. Mrs. Chun brought over a casserole and mentioned that she hoped Emma would be able to get back on her feet after whatever financial troubles had forced the move. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. The neighbors thought Emma was the victim in this situation, the struggling young woman being forced from her family home during a difficult time. The financial troubles being that she's never held a steady job and has been living rent-free while her pregnant sister slept in a garage. David's voice carried an edge of military precision. Dad shifted uncomfortably. They don't know all the details. Because you haven't told them the details, I said. You've let them assume that Emma is somehow the wrong party here. We don't air family business to the neighbors, Dad protested. But you'll let them think your pregnant daughter is heartless enough to evict her sister for no reason? The conversation was interrupted by Emma herself, appearing in the doorway with red-rimmed eyes and a suitcase in her hand. I guess you're happy now, she said, her voice thick with tears. The whole neighborhood thinks I'm some kind of failure who can't take care of herself. The whole neighborhood doesn't know the full story, David replied. Because your family has been more concerned with protecting your image than acknowledging Allison's rights. My rights? Emma laughed bitterly. What about my right to feel safe in my own family? What about my right to be supported during a difficult time? What about my right to sleep in a bedroom while pregnant? I countered. What about my right to be treated with basic respect in the house I partially own? You own half a house, Emma said dismissively, and losing my entire support system? Your support system was unsustainable, David said. Adult children don't typically live rent-free while their siblings subsidize the household expenses. Other families help each other. Other families have reciprocal relationships, I interrupted. When's the last time you helped me with anything, Emma? When's the last time you contributed to household expenses or took care of our parents or supported my career? Emma opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Because the truth was obvious to everyone in the room. Our relationship had been entirely one-sided for decades. I'm not good at practical things, she said finally. I'm more creative. Creative people also pay rent, David observed. Creative people also contribute to their households. Creative people also consider other people's needs. You don't understand what it's like to be sensitive. I understand what it's like to be responsible, I said firmly, and Eleanor is going to learn the difference. At the mention of her niece, Emma's expression softened slightly. She looked at Eleanor in my arms, then at the nursery taking shape around us. She's really beautiful, Emma said quietly. I hope ... I hope she doesn't grow up thinking badly of me. She'll grow up understanding that actions have consequences, I replied. And that family relationships require effort from everyone involved. Does that mean ... Emma's voice was hesitant. Does that mean there's no chance for us to have a relationship after Jake and I get settled? I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The woman who had dominated family conversations for 28 years, who had never learned to consider other people's needs, who had just spent 3 months prioritizing her boyfriend's gaming hobby over her pregnant sister's comfort, but also the woman who had shared a childhood with me, who had once built blanket forts and shared secrets, who was struggling to understand why her lifetime of accommodation was suddenly being withdrawn. Emma, I said carefully, I want us to have a relationship, but it has to be different. It has to be based on mutual respect and reciprocal support. It can't be based on me giving everything while you take everything. I don't know how to do that, Emma admitted, her honesty surprising everyone in the room. Then learn, David said, not unkindly. Start with your new living situation. Contribute equally to expenses, share household responsibilities. Support Jake's career without expecting someone else to support yours. And maybe, I added, start with acknowledging that other people have needs that matter as much as yours do. Emma nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. I've been selfish, haven't I? Really selfish. You've been enabled, I corrected. There's a difference. But now you have a chance to grow up, to become someone Eleanor can look up to. The conversation ended with Emma hugging Eleanor gently, whispering promises about becoming a better aunt, a better sister, a better person. Whether she would keep those promises remained to be seen, but for the first time in our relationship, the expectations were clear: equality, reciprocity, respect. The foundation for something healthier than what we had before, if Emma was willing to build it. Jake's abandoned gaming equipment sat in the middle of my reclaimed bedroom, like expensive electronic tombstones: 3 monitors, a high-end gaming chair, speakers that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. He'd left it all behind when he walked out on Emma 2 days before their move-out deadline. He just left. I asked Emma, who was sitting on my bedroom floor surrounded by boxes, looking smaller and more lost than I'd ever seen her. His parents called yesterday. They're buying him a condo in Phoenix. Emma's voice was flat, emotionally exhausted. Turnkey place, no roommates needed, no complicated girlfriend with family drama. David paused in his assembly of Eleanor's. Changing table. He's been planning this for a while, hasn't he? Emma nodded miserably. Probably since the eviction notice. Maybe longer. He never really wanted the responsibility of an actual relationship. He wanted someone to take care of him while he played games and pretended to build a brand. I shifted, Eleanor to my other arm, studying my sister's face. The realization that she'd been used was written clearly in her expression. The dawning understanding that Jake's support had been conditional on her family's willingness to subsidize his lifestyle. "What about the apartment you found?" I asked. "The 1-bedroom near downtown? I can't afford it alone." "The deposit, first month's rent?" Emma gestured helplessly at the boxes around her. Jake was supposed to cover half. His supervisor's salary was our safety net. "So what's your plan?" David asked, not unsympathetically. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the cardboard box beside her. "I don't know. I've never had to make a plan by myself before." The admission hung in the air, more honest than anything Emma had said in months. At 25, she'd never lived independently, never managed her own finances, never faced consequences without someone else stepping in to cushion the impact. "The apartment can wait," I said finally. "You can stay in the guest room until you figure things out." Emma's head snapped up, hope flickering in her eyes. "Really? Even after everything?" "With conditions," I added quickly, seeing David's questioning look. "You get a job any job within 2 weeks. You pay rent based on your income. You contribute to household expenses and chores. And you respect the fact that this is David's and my home, with our rules and our boundaries." But the eviction notice was, "For Jake," David clarified, "your family. Complicated, frustrating family, but family nonetheless." Emma's eyes filled with tears, not the manipulative tears I'd seen so often, but genuine relief and gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." "Start by growing up," I said, but not unkindly. "Start by learning to take care of yourself instead of expecting other people to solve your problems." Over the next few hours, we helped Emma sort through the debris of her relationship with Jake. Half the belongings in her room belonged to him: expensive electronics, designer clothes, gadgets that reflected his priorities more than hers. Her own possessions fit into 3 boxes: some clothes, a few books, art supplies she hadn't touched in months. "I don't even know who I am without someone else defining me," Emma said, holding up a sketchbook from college. "First it was mom and dad, then professors, then Jake. I've never just been ... me. That's the opportunity," David said, carefully packing Jake's abandoned gaming setup into boxes. "To figure out who Emma is when she's not performing for someone else's approval." We found Jake's business plan tucked behind his monitors, a grandiose document outlining his path to streaming fame, complete with unrealistic revenue projections and marketing strategies that relied heavily on Emma's support and promotion. Reading it, I realized how thoroughly he'd planned to use our family's resources to launch his career. He was never planning to contribute equally, was he? Emma asked, reading over my shoulder. His plan required you to be his manager, social media coordinator, and financial backer, I said, while living rent-free in our house and eating food bought with our money. And I was so grateful for his attention that I thought it was romantic, Emma said bitterly. God, I'm pathetic. You're inexperienced, David corrected. There's a difference. Pathetic suggests you can't learn better, and experience means you can. That evening, after Jake's belongings were packed and ready for pickup, Emma sat in the kitchen with the newspaper classified spread in front of her. For the first time in her adult life, she was looking for entry-level work retail, food service, basic office jobs that required no experience but offered steady paychecks. I never thought I'd be applying to work at Target, she said, circling. Job listings. Honest work, Dad said, joining us at the table with his evening coffee. Nothing wrong with retail. I looked at my father with surprise. For years, he'd supported Emma's artistic pursuits while dismissing practical employment as somehow beneath her creative sensibilities. Jake leaving seems to have clarified some things, Mom added, settling beside Dad, about who was really committed to building a life together versus who was just looking for someone to support their hobbies. It was the most direct criticism of Jake, and by extension, Emma's judgment that I'd ever heard from my parents. The shock of seeing Emma abandoned so casually had apparently opened their eyes to dynamics they'd been ignoring. I have an interview tomorrow at the bookstore downtown, Emma said. Part-time to start, but they said there's room for growth if I'm reliable. Are you? I asked. Reliable? Emma considered this seriously. I don't know. I've never had to be, but I want to find out. As we cleaned up Jake's electronic debris and prepared for Emma's first real attempt at independence, I felt something shift in our family dynamic. The crisis had forced honesty that years of comfortable dysfunction had prevented. Emma was finally facing the consequences of her choices. My parents were finally acknowledging the enabling they'd done, and I was finally able to protect my own family without guilt. Jake's gaming equipment sat boxed and ready for pickup, an expensive reminder of misplaced priorities and manipulative relationships. But Emma's job application spread across our kitchen table represented something more hopeful, the possibility of growth, independence, and genuine family relationships based on mutual respect. Whether Emma would follow through remained to be seen. But for the first time in our adult relationship, the foundation was there for something healthier than what we'd had before. Eleanor stirred in her bassinet, making the soft sounds that meant she was waking up. As I lifted my daughter and settled into the rocking chair to feed her, I realized she would grow up watching very different family dynamics than the ones that had shaped my childhood. She would see adults who worked for what they wanted, who contributed fairly to shared responsibilities, who faced consequences for their choices without expecting someone else to rescue them. She would see what healthy boundaries looked like, even when they were difficult to maintain. Most importantly, she would never doubt that her needs mattered, that her comfort was a priority, that she had value beyond what she could give to others. Jake's exit had been the catalyst, but the real transformation was just beginning. The family photo with empty spaces sat on the mantel like a puzzle waiting to be completed. It had been taken at Eleanor's 1-month celebration, but the gaps were obvious. Jake's absence where he would have stood behind Emma, the slightly awkward spacing that revealed how our family constellation had shifted. We should take a new one, Emma suggested, adjusting Eleanor's tiny knit hat as she held her knees. Now that we know who's actually staying. Emma had been working at the bookstore for 3 weeks, and the change was remarkable. She woke up at 7 a.m. without complaint, dressed in the business casual clothes she'd bought with her first paycheck, and came home tired but accomplished. The dramatic crises that had defined her adult life had been replaced by the quiet satisfaction. of earning her own money. How's therapy going? I asked, settling beside her on the couch. Hard, Emma admitted. Dr. Stevens makes me look at patterns I've been avoiding my whole life. Like how I learned to get attention through crisis instead of achievement. Emma's therapy had been her own idea, a decision made during her first week of work when she'd realized how unprepared she was for adult responsibilities. She was seeing Dr. Stevens twice a week, paying for it herself, and actually doing the homework assignments. What kind of patterns? David asked, joining us with coffee. Like expecting other people to rescue me from consequences, Emma said, her voice thoughtful rather than defensive. Or believing that my feelings were more important than other people's practical needs. I watched her with Eleanor, noting how naturally she'd adapted to her niece's needs, supporting her head properly, recognizing her different cries, respecting feeding schedules without making them about her own convenience. Dr. Stevens says, I have to learn the difference between being supported and being enabled, Emma continued. Being supported means people help you develop your own capabilities. Being enabled means they do things for you that you should be doing yourself. That's a crucial distinction, David observed. I've been enabled my entire life, Emma said simply. By mom and dad, by professors who made exceptions for my artistic temperament, by Jake who told me I was too sensitive for regular work. I never learned to be competent because someone was always there to compensate for my incompetence. Mom appeared in the doorway, having overheard the last part of the conversation. We thought we were helping, she said quietly. I know, Emma replied, but help that prevents someone from growing isn't really help. It's just comfort for everyone involved. The changes in our family dynamic were subtle but profound. Emma contributed to household expenses without being asked. She took turns cooking dinner and actually showed up when it was her night. She cleaned without leaving passive-aggressive notes about other people's messes. Most significantly, she'd stopped making her problems everyone else's emergency. I got promoted to full-time, Emma announced over dinner that evening. Sarah says, I'm one of the most reliable employees she's had in years. That's wonderful, Dad said. And I could hear genuine pride in his voice, pride based on Emma's actual accomplishments rather than potential she might someday realize. It means I can afford a studio apartment, Emma continued. There's a cute place above the coffee shop on Main Street. Nothing fancy, but it would be mine. I felt a complex mix of emotions, relief that Emma was ready for independence, pride in her growth, and surprisingly, a touch of sadness at the thought of her leaving. Are you ready for that? I asked. Emma considered the question seriously, the way she'd learned to consider most questions now. I think so. I want to find out what it feels like to be responsible for my own space, my own bills, my own choices. And if it gets overwhelming. Mom asked, the old enabling impulse still present even as she tried to suppress it. Then I'll figure it out, Emma said firmly. That's what adults do. They figure things out instead of expecting other people to solve their problems. Later that evening, after Emma had gone upstairs to research furniture for her potential apartment, I found myself looking at the family photos lining our hallway. Years of pictures chronicling Emma's various phases, the traumatic teenage years, the college experiments with different personas, the recent Jake era where she tried to become whoever he wanted her to be. She's finally becoming herself, David observed, following my gaze. I'm not sure she knows who that is yet, I replied, but she's willing to find out. That's more growth than I've seen from her in 25 years. Eleanor made a soft sound from her swing, and I moved to check on her. At 5 weeks old, she was becoming more alert, more interactive, more obviously the little person she was going to become. Watching her discover her own hands, her own voice, her own preferences, I was struck by how natural development was when it wasn't interfered with. What kind of aunt do you think Emma will be? David asked, settling beside Eleanor's. Swing, A better one than she was a sister, I hope, I said. She's learning that relationships require effort from both people, that other people's needs matter as much as her own. That's a good foundation for any relationship. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. David went to answer it, returning with Mrs. Patterson and a covered dish. "I brought you some of my vegetable soup," she said, settling the dish on our counter. "For the new mother." "That's very kind of you," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "I also wanted to apologize," Mrs. Patterson continued, her expression serious. "I made some assumptions about your family situation that weren't fair or accurate." I looked at her with surprise. Assumptions? About Emma moving out? I thought you were being harsh with her during a difficult time. But Emma stopped by yesterday to thank me for the meals I brought over, and she explained more about what had actually been happening. "What did she tell you?" I asked, curious. "That she'd been living here rent-free while you were pregnant and working full-time. That her boyfriend had been using your bedroom while you slept in the garage. That you'd been supporting adults who should have been supporting themselves." Mrs. Patterson shook her head with obvious disapproval. I had no idea. Emma was very honest about how she'd taken advantage of your generosity. She said she's learning to be a better person, and from what I can see, she's succeeding. After Mrs. Patterson left, I realized something had shifted in how our family was perceived by others. Instead of hiding the dysfunction or making excuses for Emma's behavior, we were acknowledging it honestly and working to change it. "It feels different, doesn't it?" Emma said, appearing in the kitchen. "Being honest about our problems instead of pretending everything's fine. It feels healthier," I agreed. "More real." "Dr. Stevens says that secrets keep us sick," Emma said, settling at the kitchen table with her laptop. "That families heal when they stop protecting each other from the truth." I watched her work on her apartment application, noting the care she was taking with the details, the responsibility she was showing for her own future. This was what growth looked like, not dramatic transformations or grand gestures, but daily choices to be more honest, more accountable, more considerate of others. "Eleanor is going to grow up in a very different family than we did," Emma said, looking up from her laptop. "That's the goal," I replied. "A better family," Emma added. "One where people take care of themselves and support each other, instead of expecting one person to do all the giving." As I put Eleanor to bed that night, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 months. Emma was learning independence, my parents were learning appropriate boundaries, and I was learning that protecting my own family didn't make me selfish. It made me responsible. The family photo with empty spaces would eventually be replaced with a new one showing who we really were instead of who we'd been pretending to be. But even with its gaps, the current photo represented something important: the courage to acknowledge that some relationships needed to, and for others to heal. Eleanor would grow up understanding that love didn't mean accepting mistreatment, that family didn't mean sacrificing your own well-being for others' comfort, that boundaries weren't barriers to love, they were the foundation that made genuine love possible. That was a legacy worth fighting for. The new family portrait sits on the mantle in a place of honor, David and me on either side of Eleanor's high chair, my parents flanking us with genuine smiles, and Emma holding her 6-month-old niece with the confident ease of someone who's learned to be truly helpful rather than performatively present. 6 months have passed since that October night when my water broke, launching the series of confrontations that would reshape our entire family dynamic. Eleanor is sitting up now, reaching for everything, babbling in the conversational tones that suggest she has important things to say about the world she's inherited. "She looks just like you did at that age," Mom says, adjusting Eleanor's bib, as she prepares for another attempt at solid food. Same serious expression, same determination to do everything herself. Emma laughs from her spot at the kitchen table, where she's grading papers from her new job as a reading tutor at the elementary school. Good thing she inherited Allison's independence instead of my talent for expecting other people to solve my problems. The comment would have been impossible 6 months ago. Emma acknowledging her own patterns without defensiveness, actually celebrating traits in others that she'd once resented. Therapy and genuine independence have transformed her into someone I genuinely enjoy spending time with. How's the apartment treating you? David asks Emma, settling into his chair with his coffee, like a responsible adult who pays her own bills and makes her own decisions. Emma replies with obvious satisfaction. It's the first time in my life I felt actually competent instead of just accommodated. Emma's studio apartment above the coffee shop has become her sanctuary, small, affordable, and entirely her own responsibility. She's furnished it gradually with pieces she's saved for and chosen herself, creating a space that reflects who she's becoming rather than who she used to be. The kids at school seem to really respond to your teaching style. I observe, watching her sort through student assignments with genuine care. Turns out all those years of needing extra attention taught me how to recognize kids who need extra attention, Emma says, but in a helpful way, not an enabling way. The distinction has become crucial in Emma's new life. She's learned to offer support that builds capabilities rather than creating dependence, both in her work and in our family relationships. Speaking of school, Dad interjects, how are your college applications coming along? Emma's decision to pursue a teaching degree had surprised everyone, including herself. But working as a tutor had revealed both a natural talent for connecting with struggling students and a genuine passion for helping them overcome challenges. I got accepted into the education program at the community college, Emma announces, her voice carrying quiet pride. Part-time evening classes so I can keep working. It'll take longer, but I'll be paying for it myself. The contrast with her first college experience couldn't be more stark. This time, Emma has clear goals, realistic expectations, and the financial responsibility that comes with genuine investment in her own future. Eleanor chooses that moment to successfully capture a piece of banana and guide it to her mouth, an achievement that earns applause from her entire extended family. Watching her master new skills through persistence and practice, I'm struck by how naturally development happens when it's not interfered with by well-meaning but misguided rescue attempts. She's going to be trouble, Dad says fondly, watching Eleanor experiment with cause and effect by dropping toys from her high chair. She's going to be strong, I correct. She's going to know that her needs matter, but she's capable of solving problems, that she deserves to be treated with respect. Like her mother, David adds. Squeezing my hand across the table, the transformation in our family dynamics has been gradual but profound. My parents have learned to treat Emma and me as equals, celebrating our different strengths without creating hierarchies of value. Emma has learned to contribute to relationships instead of just taking from them. I've learned that protecting my own family's well-being isn't selfish, it's essential. I have news too, I announce, having waited for the right moment. The hospital offered me the nurse manager position in the pediatric unit. The promotion represents recognition of skills I'd been developing for years but had never received proper acknowledgement for. More importantly, it means I'll be able to create the kind of supportive environment for other families that I'd needed during my own pregnancy. That's wonderful. Emma says, her enthusiasm completely genuine. You'll be amazing at that. You understand what patients and families need because you've been where they are. 6 months ago, Emma would have found a way to make my good news about her own struggles. Now she celebrates my success without needing to compete for attention. When do you start? Mom asks. Next month. Eleanor will go to the hospital daycare, which means I can check on her during breaks. Perfect timing all around. As we clean up from lunch, I find myself marveling at how different this family gathering feels from the tense confrontations of last fall. We're still the same people, but we're relating to each other from positions of strength rather than dysfunction. Emma loads the dishwasher without being asked, a small gesture that represents the fundamental shift in how she approaches shared responsibilities. Mom and Dad work together to entertain Eleanor, while David and I finish kitchen cleanup, everyone contributing naturally rather than expecting someone else to manage everything. Remember when Sunday dinners used to end with someone storming out? Emma asks, wiping down the counters. Usually you, I reply, but without the edge that comment would have carried months ago. Usually me, Emma agrees easily, because I'd made everything about my feelings instead of just enjoying time with family. After my parents leave and Emma heads back to her apartment to prepare lessons for the week, David and I settle in the living room with Eleanor. She's content to practice sitting up between us, occasionally toppling over in ways that make her laugh instead of cry. She's fearless, David observes, watching Eleanor attempt to reach a toy that's just beyond her grasp. She doesn't know she should be afraid of failing, I reply. She just knows what she wants and keeps trying until she gets it. It's exactly the attitude I want Eleanor to maintain throughout her life. The confidence to pursue what she needs without expecting someone else to provide it. The resilience to keep trying when things don't work immediately. The self-respect to believe she deserves good things. Think Emma will stick with the teaching program? David asks. I think she will, I say, considering the question seriously. She's discovered something she's actually good at, and she's paying for it herself. That's a completely different motivation than what she had before. And if she doesn't, then she'll face the consequences and make different choices like adults do. The evening routine with Eleanor has become one of my favorite parts of the day: bath time, story time, the quiet moments of nursing before she falls asleep in my arms. Tonight, as I rock her in the nursery we'd planned so carefully, I think about the future we're building together. Eleanor will grow up in a house where adults take responsibility for their own choices. She sees relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. She learned that boundaries aren't selfish. They're the foundation that makes genuine love possible. Most importantly, she never doubt that she matters, not because of what she can give to others, but because of who she is. Look at this, David says, appearing in the nursery doorway with his phone. Emma sent pictures from her apartment. I look at the photos, Emma's small but tidy space, decorated with artwork from her students and photos of Eleanor. It's modest but genuinely hers, earned through her own efforts rather than provided by others. She looks happy, I observe. Actually, happy, not just comfortable. There's a difference between being supported and being enabled, David quotes Emma's therapist. She's finally experiencing real support from herself. As I put Eleanor in her crib, she reaches up to touch my face with her tiny palm, her dark eyes serious and trusting. In that gesture, I see the future I've been fighting to create: a child who will grow up knowing she's valued, protected, and capable of amazing things. The journey from that October night in the garage to this moment of peace and possibility hasn't been easy. It required confronting decades of dysfunction, setting boundaries that felt cruel but were actually kind, and learning that loving someone sometimes means refusing to enable their worst behaviors, but looking around. Eleanor's nursery, the morning sunshine walls, the carefully chosen furniture, the family photos showing genuine connection rather than performed happiness. I know it was worth every difficult conversation, every uncomfortable boundary, every moment of standing firm against pressure to accommodate. Dysfunction. Eleanor will never sleep in a garage while someone else prioritizes their hobbies over her well-being. She never questioned whether her needs matter or whether she deserves basic respect and consideration. She grew up understanding that healthy families support each other's growth rather than enabling each other's stagnation. That love isn't measured by how much you're willing to sacrifice, but by how much you're willing to invest in each other's genuine well-being. And someday, when she faces her own challenges and difficult relationships, she have the strength to set her own boundaries, the wisdom to recognize the difference between support and enablement, and the confidence to believe she deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. That's the legacy. I wanted to leave her not perfection, but the tools to build something healthy and sustainable. Even when it's difficult, as David and I turn off the nursery light and head to our own bedroom, I feel the deep satisfaction of work well done. Not the perfection that family mythology often promises, but the honest, complicated, ultimately healing work of building relationships based on truth rather than comfortable lies. Eleanor's soft breathing through the baby monitor provides the soundtrack to our evening, the rhythm of new life, new possibilities, new beginnings built on the foundation of lessons learned, and boundaries maintained. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, as all tomorrows do. But tonight, our family rests in the peace that comes from knowing everyone is exactly where they belong, in relationships that honor both individual worth and collective well-being. The garage has been converted into David's workshop, a space for building and creating rather than exile and accommodation. My childhood bedroom is now Eleanor's nursery, a place of nurturing and growth rather than displacement and resentment. And I finally learned the difference between being needed and being used, between family loyalty and family dysfunction, between temporary accommodation and permanent enabling. Most importantly, I've learned that protecting your own family's well-being isn't selfish. It's the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved, including the people who don't understand it yet. Eleanor will grow up in a family that learned these lessons before it was too late. That alone makes every difficult conversation, every uncomfortable boundary, every moment of standing firm against pressure worth it. Some stories end with dramatic reconciliations and perfect resolutions. But the best stories, the real ones, end with the quiet satisfaction of work well done, relationships honestly rebuilt, and a future founded on truth rather than comfortable illusions. This is one of those stories.